Question 1. A behavior technician is collecting data on a client's hand flapping. They record every instance of hand flapping that occurs during a 30-minute observation period. What type of measurement is this technician using? A. Partial interval recording. B. Duration recording. C. Frequency recording. D. Momentary time sampling. Answer: C. Frequency recording. This question tests your understanding of common measurement procedures in ABA. The keyword every instance tells you the technician is counting how many times the behavior happens, which is the definition of frequency recording. Frequency is used when you want to know how often a behavior occurs, like counting how many times a child says please. It's one of the simplest and most direct ways to measure behavior. Just remember, frequency is all about counting each occurrence of the target behavior. Question 2. Which of the following is a key component of informed consent in behavioral services? A. The client or guardian understands the procedures, risks, and benefits. B. The behavior analyst guarantees the outcome of the intervention. C. The client agrees to the intervention verbally, without needing it in writing. D. The consent is obtained only after the intervention has begun. Answer: A. The client or guardian understands the procedures, risks, and benefits. This question focuses on informed consent, an essential ethical requirement in ABA. The phrase key component directs you to the core elements needed for consent to be considered truly informed. Informed consent means the person or their legal guardian fully understands what will happen, why it will happen, what potential good and bad things could result, and agrees voluntarily before any services start. It must be documented, usually in writing, ensuring the individual has the capacity to make the decision. Think of it as making sure everyone is on the same page and agrees before starting a journey together. Question 3. A child is learning to tie their shoes. The behavior technician provides full physical guidance for the entire process, then gradually fades the guidance across sessions until the child can perform the skill independently. What prompting procedure is being used? A. Least to most prompting. B. Time delay. C. Most to least prompting. D. Stimulus fading. Answer: C. Most to least prompting. This question describes a common prompting strategy used in skill acquisition. The clue provides full physical guidance, then gradually fades indicates that the most intrusive prompt, full physical, was used first and systematically reduced. Most to least prompting starts with the strongest necessary prompt to ensure a correct response and decreases prompting as the learner becomes more proficient. This helps the learner experience success early on and prevents them from making errors, gradually transferring control to the natural stimulus. For example, helping a child with hand-over-hand guidance to write a letter and slowly lessening the help is most to least prompting. Remember, most to least starts with maximum support and reduces it over time. Question 4. When conducting a functional analysis, what is the primary purpose of manipulating antecedent and consequent variables? A. To determine the topography of the behavior. B. To identify the function of the challenging behavior. C. To measure the duration of the behavior. D. To create a punishment procedure. Answer: B. To identify the function of the challenging behavior. This question is about the core purpose of a functional analysis, a specific assessment method. The keywords functional analysis and manipulating antecedent and consequent variables point directly to its goal: discovering why a behavior occurs. A functional analysis systematically tests different conditions, like attention being available or unavailable, to see how they affect the behavior, helping to figure out if the behavior is maintained by attention, escape, tangibles, or automatic reinforcement. This experimental approach is crucial for designing effective interventions because interventions should target the behavior's function. It's like being a detective trying to figure out the reason behind a behavior by testing different scenarios. Question 5. A parent gives their child a sticker every time the child puts away their toys. The child begins putting away their toys more often. What behavioral principle is the parent using? A. Punishment. B. Extinction. C. Negative reinforcement. D. Positive reinforcement. Answer: D. Positive reinforcement. This question asks you to identify the behavioral principle demonstrated in the scenario. The scenario shows that a stimulus sticker was added after the behavior, putting away toys, and this resulted in the behavior increasing, putting away toys more often. This is the definition of positive reinforcement, adding something desirable following a behavior to make that behavior more likely to occur in the future. Giving a child praise immediately after they share a toy, leading to more sharing, is another example. Positive reinforcement is about adding something good to increase a behavior. Question 6. Which measurement procedure involves dividing an observation period into equal intervals and recording if the behavior occurred at any point during the interval? A. Whole interval recording. B. Momentary time sampling. C. Partial interval recording. D. Frequency recording. Answer: C. Partial interval recording. This question describes a specific type of discontinuous measurement. The key phrase is recording if the behavior occurred at any point during the interval. In partial interval recording, you simply mark if the behavior happened at all within the set time chunk, even if it was just for a second. This method often overestimates the duration of the behavior, but is useful for behaviors that don't have a clear start and end or happen at a high rate. If a child fidgets frequently, you might use partial interval recording to capture whether fidgeting occurred at all within each 1-minute interval. Just remember, with partial interval, you mark it if it happens at any point in the interval. Question 7. A behavior analyst is designing a new intervention. According to ethical guidelines, what should be their primary consideration when selecting intervention strategies? A. The preference of the behavior technician. B. The cost and convenience of the intervention. C. The scientific evidence supporting the intervention's effectiveness. D. The popularity of the intervention on social media. Answer: C. The scientific evidence supporting the intervention's effectiveness. This question tests your knowledge of the ethical responsibility to use evidence-based practices. The phrase primary consideration highlights the most important factor when choosing treatments in ABA. Ethical practice requires using interventions that have been shown through research to be effective for the target behavior and population. Relying on personal preference, cost, or popularity is not ethical because it doesn't prioritize the client's well-being and likelihood of positive outcomes. Always base intervention decisions on what the science says works best. Question 8. A child is learning to wash their hands. The behavior technician teaches the last step first, drying hands, then teaches the second to last step, rinsing hands, and links it to the last step, and so on, working backward through the steps. What type of chaining is this? A. Total task chaining. B. Forward chaining. C. Backward chaining. D. Behavior rehearsal. Answer: C. Backward chaining. This question describes a method for teaching a sequence of behaviors, known as chaining. The clue teaches the last step first. Working backward through the steps clearly indicates backward chaining. In backward chaining, the trainer completes all steps except the last one, prompts the learner to do the last step, and reinforces them upon completion. Once the learner masters the last step, the trainer completes all steps except the last two, prompts the learner on the second to last, and reinforces them. This method is often used because the learner completes the chain and receives reinforcement on every learning trial. Imagine teaching someone to bake a cake by having them do only the last step, decorating, until mastered, then the last two, frosting and decorating, and so on. Question 9. A behavior is followed by the removal of a stimulus, and the future probability of the behavior increases. This describes which behavioral principle? A. Positive punishment. B. Positive reinforcement. C. Negative punishment. D. Negative reinforcement. Answer D. Negative reinforcement. This question asks you to identify a specific behavioral principle based on its definition. The key elements are followed by the removal of a stimulus, and future probability of the behavior increases. Negative reinforcement occurs when a behavior is strengthened because something aversive is taken away following the behavior. For example, hitting the snooze button behavior stops the annoying alarm sound, removal of stimulus, making hitting snooze more likely in the future. It's about taking something away to increase a behavior. Question 10. An intervention is implemented to decrease a child's screaming behavior. For the first week, the screaming decreases slightly, but then it temporarily increases before eventually decreasing over several more weeks. What behavioral phenomenon likely explains the temporary increase? A. Stimulus generalization. B. Spontaneous recovery. C. Extinction burst. D. Discrimination. Answer C. Extinction burst. This question describes a common phenomenon that occurs when a previously reinforced behavior is no longer followed by reinforcement. The pattern described, behavior initially decreasing slightly, then temporarily increasing, explodes, and eventually decreasing, is characteristic of an extinction burst. An extinction burst is a temporary increase in the frequency, intensity, or variability of a behavior when extinction is first implemented. If a child screams to get attention and you stop providing attention, extinction, they might scream louder and more often initially before giving up. This burst is a natural part of the extinction process. Question 11. Which of the following is an example of a conditioned reinforcer? A. Food. B. Water. C. Praise. D. Shelter. Answer C. Praise. This question asks you to distinguish between different types of reinforcers. A conditioned reinforcer is a stimulus that has acquired its reinforcing properties through being paired with primary, unlearned, reinforcers or other conditioned reinforcers. Unlike food or water, which are primary reinforcers because they are biologically necessary, praise is learned to be reinforcing because it has been associated with positive experiences, money, tokens, or specific toys that weren't initially reinforcing but became so through association are also examples of conditioned reinforcers. Think of a conditioned reinforcer as something you learned to like because it was linked to things you already liked. Question 12. A behavior analyst is designing a scatterplot assessment. What is the primary purpose of using a scatterplot? A. To identify potential establishing operations. B. To record the sequence of behaviors. C. To discover patterns in behavior related to time or place. D. To measure the intensity of a behavior. Answer C. To discover patterns in behavior related to time or place. This question asks about the purpose of a scatterplot assessment, a data collection method used in behavioral assessment. A scatterplot is a grid used to mark when a behavior occurs across different periods of time, example, hours of the day, and days. By visually inspecting where the marks cluster, the behavior analyst can identify patterns, such as the behavior occurring only in the morning or only in specific locations. This helps form hypotheses about the antecedents or consequences related to the behavior. It's a way to see if a behavior happens more often at certain times or places. Question 13. Which experimental design involves rapidly alternating between two or more distinct conditions, example, intervention viz. Baseline, to show their effect on the target behavior? A. Multiple baseline design. B. Reversal design. ABA, ABAB. C. Changing criterion design. D. Alternating treatments design, multi-element design. Answer: D. Alternating treatments design, multi-element design. This question describes a specific type of single-subject experimental design. The key phrase rapidly alternating between two or more distinct conditions is the defining characteristic of the alternating treatments design. In this design, different conditions, example, two different teaching methods, or an intervention and a no-intervention condition, are presented in rapid succession, often within the same session, to see which condition has a greater effect on the behavior. This allows for quick comparison of different interventions without needing to withdraw a treatment completely. Imagine comparing the effectiveness of stickers versus praise as reinforcement by using one in one session and the other in the next, alternating quickly. Question 14. A client receives a token for every correct math problem completed. The client can exchange accumulated tokens for preferred items from a menu. This system is an example of A. Contingency contracting. B. Group contingency. C. Token economy. D. Response cost. Answer: C. Token economy. This question describes a widely used behavior change system. The description involves earning tokens for specific behaviors, which can then be exchanged for preferred items. This setup is the core of a token economy. A token economy is a system where generalized conditioned reinforcers, tokens, points, etc., are earned for specific behaviors and later exchanged for backup reinforcers, preferred items, activities. It's effective because the tokens bridge the gap between the behavior and the backup reinforcer and can be delivered immediately. Think of it like earning points for chores that you can trade in for video game time later. Question 15. The ethical principle, do no harm, is most closely associated with which term? A. Beneficence. B. Non-maleficence. C. Fidelity. D. Justice. Answer: B. Non-maleficence. This question asks about a fundamental ethical principle. To no harm is the direct meaning of non-maleficence, while behavior analysts also strive for beneficence, doing goody. Non-maleficence specifically refers to the obligation to avoid causing harm to clients. This means carefully considering the potential risks of any assessment or intervention procedure and minimizing them. Always prioritize the client's safety and well-being by ensuring your actions do not cause harm. Question 16. A teacher praises a student every time they raise their hand before speaking. Initially, the teacher praised every instance, but now only praises some instances. What reinforcement schedule is the teacher likely transitioning towards? A. Continuous reinforcement, CRF. B. Fixed interval, FI. C. Variable ratio, VR. D. Intermittent reinforcement. Answer: D. Intermittent reinforcement. This question describes a change in how often reinforcement is provided. The teacher started with praising every time, continuous reinforcement, and is moving to praising some instances. When reinforcement is delivered for only a portion of correct responses, it is considered intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent schedules, like fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, variable interval, build resistance to extinction, meaning the behavior is more likely to continue even if reinforcement isn't delivered every single time. Moving from continuous to intermittent reinforcement is a standard practice to maintain behavior once it's established. Question 17. A behavior analyst is writing a behavior intervention plan, BAP. What is a crucial element that must be included in the BAP? A. A list of all the client's favorite foods. B. Objective, measurable definitions of the target behaviors. C. The behavior analyst's personal opinions about the client. D. A guarantee of eliminating the challenging behavior. Answer: B. Objective, measurable definitions of the target behaviors. This question asks about an essential component of a well-written behavior intervention plan. To effectively track and intervene on a behavior, it must be defined clearly so that anyone reading the plan understands exactly what behavior is being referred to. An objective and measurable definition avoids subjective interpretation, example being disruptive, and allows for consistent data collection, example any instance of yelling or throwing objects. This clear definition is the foundation for assessment and intervention. For example, instead of Johnny is aggressive, a definition might be Johnny hits another person with an open or closed hand. Question 18. Which term refers to a stimulus that signals the availability of reinforcement for a particular behavior? A. Establishing operation, EO. B. Abolishing operation, AO. C. Discriminative stimulus, SD. D. Motivating operation, MO. Answer C. Discriminative stimulus, SD. This question asks for the term that describes a specific type of antecedent stimulus. The key phrase signals the availability of reinforcement for a particular behavior is the definition of a discriminative stimulus, SD. Its est is a stimulus that, in its presence, a specific response is more likely to be reinforced than in its absence. For example, a stop sign, SD, signals that pressing the brake behavior will be reinforced, avoiding an accident ticket, whereas a green light does not. It's a cue that tells you now is a good time to do this behavior if you want reinforcement. Question 19. A behavior analyst is supervising a behavior technician. What is an ethical responsibility of the behavior analyst regarding supervision? A. To assign the technician tasks outside their competence and training. B. To provide supervision only when requested by the technician. C. To provide supervision that is commensurate with the technician's skills and responsibilities. D. To ensure the technician works independently without guidance. Answer C. To provide supervision that is commensurate with the technician's skills and responsibilities. This question addresses the ethical requirements for supervision in ABA. Behavior analysts have an ethical duty to ensure their supervisees are competent and providing services effectively and ethically. This means the amount and type of supervision should match the technician's experience level, the complexity of the cases, and the tasks they are performing. Supervising too little or providing guidance beyond the technician's training is unethical and can harm the client. Good supervision provides the necessary support and guidance for the technician to succeed and clients to benefit. Question 20. Which type of graph is most commonly used in ABA to display data over time? A. Bar graph. B. Pie chart. C. Line graph. D. Histogram. Answer C. Line graph. This question asks about the standard graphing method in ABA. Line graphs are the most common type of graph used in applied behavior analysis because they effectively show changes in behavior frequency, duration, or percentage over time. Time is typically plotted on the x-axis, horizontal, and the behavior measure is plotted on the y-axis, vertical, allowing for clear visual analysis of trends and the impact of interventions. Seeing a behavior count increase or decrease across sessions is best shown with a line graph. It's the go-to graph for tracking progress in ABA. Question 21. A child screams whenever math worksheets are presented. The screaming results in the teacher removing the worksheet. The child's screaming increases in the future when math worksheets are presented. What is the likely function of the screaming behavior? A. Attention. B. Access to tangibles. C. Escape. D. Automatic reinforcement. Answer C. Escape. This question asks you to identify the likely function of a behavior based on the provided scenario. The scenario shows that the behavior, screaming, occurs in the presence of a specific stimulus, math worksheets, and is followed by the removal of that stimulus, teacher removes worksheet. The outcome is that the behavior increases in similar situations. This pattern indicates the behavior is maintained by negative reinforcement, specifically functioning to escape from or avoid something aversive. The worksheet. The screaming helps the child get away from the task. Question 22. What is the primary goal of a skill acquisition program in ABA? A. To eliminate all challenging behaviors. B. To teach the client new appropriate behaviors. C. To identify the function of behaviors. D. To conduct a preference assessment. Answer. B. To teach the client new appropriate behaviors. This question asks about the main purpose of skill acquisition programming. While ABA addresses challenging behavior, a primary focus is teaching individuals the skills they need to succeed and participate more fully in their environment. Skill acquisition programs systematically teach new behaviors, such as communication skills, social skills, daily living skills, or academic skills, using principles of reinforcement and prompting. It's about building a client's repertoire of useful behaviors. For example, teaching a child how to ask for a toy nicely is a skill acquisition goal. Question 23. A behavior analyst is reviewing a client's data and notices a clear upward trend after implementing a new intervention. This suggests the intervention is likely A. Ineffective. B. Causing an extinction burst. C. Having a positive effect on the target behavior if the behavior is desirable. D. Leading to spontaneous recovery. Answer. C. Having a positive effect on the target behavior if the behavior is desirable. This question tests your ability to interpret data trends on a graph. An upward trend indicates that the behavior is increasing over time. If the target behavior is something you want to increase, like using functional communication or academic responses, then an upward trend after starting an intervention suggests the intervention is effective in increasing that behavior. Visual analysis of graphed data is a crucial part of determining intervention effectiveness in ABA. Seeing a desired behavior go up on the graph means the plan is likely working. Question 24. Which term refers to delivering reinforcement for any behavior except the target challenging behavior? A. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, DRI. B. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, DRA. C. Differential reinforcement of other behavior, DRO. D. Differential reinforcement of low rates, DRL. Answer. C. Differential reinforcement of other behavior, DRO. This question asks about a specific differential reinforcement procedure. The description delivering reinforcement for any behavior except the target challenging behavior is the definition of differential reinforcement of other behavior. DRO. With DRO, reinforcement is provided if the target behavior does not occur for a specified period of time. You are reinforcing the absence of the problem behavior or whatever else the person happens to be doing instead. For example, giving a child a sticker if they go for 5 minutes without hitting, regardless of what else they do during that time, is DRO. Question 25. The dead man's test is a simple way to evaluate if a definition of behavior is appropriate for ABA. Which of the following best describes the dead man's test? A. If a dead man can do it, it's probably not a behavior. B. If a dead man can't do it, it's probably not a behavior. C. If a living person can do it, it is a behavior. D. If a living person can't do it, it is not a behavior. Answer. A. If a dead man can do it, it's probably not a behavior. This question introduces a simple heuristic for defining behavior. The dead man's test states that if a dead person can perform the action described, it is not a behavior in the ABA sense. Behavior in ABA is something a living organism does or says. Not doing something, example, sitting still, being quiet, not hand flapping, is often the absence of behavior, not a behavior itself that can be reinforced or punished directly. For example, sitting quietly fails the test because a dead man can sit quietly. Instead, you might define the behavior as remaining seated with feet on the floor and hands in lap. Use this test to ensure your behavior definitions describe active actions. Question 26. A client typically bites their hand when they are denied access to a preferred toy. The behavior analyst hypothesizes that the biting is maintained by access to tangibles. Which functional assessment method involves observing the client in their natural environment and recording antecedents, behaviors, and consequences as they occur? A. Functional analysis. B. Indirect assessment example interviews, questionnaires. C. Descriptive assessment example ABC detail. D. Experimental analysis. Answer C. Descriptive assessment example ABC detail. This question asks about a specific type of functional assessment. The description involves observing the client in their natural environment and recording antecedents, behaviors, and consequences as they occur. This is the core of a descriptive assessment, commonly done through ABC data collection. Unlike a functional analysis which manipulates variables, a descriptive assessment simply records what happens naturally before, during, and after the behavior to identify correlations between the behavior and environmental events. It helps generate hypotheses about the function, but it doesn't prove causation. Collecting ABC data on biting episodes helps you see what usually happens before and after the biting. Question 27. Which concept refers to a temporary increase in the value of a reinforcer and an increase in the probability of behaviors that have been previously reinforced by that reinforcer? A. Abolishing operation, AO. B. Discriminative stimulus, ST. C. Conditioned reinforcer, T. Establishing operation, EO. Answer D. Establishing operation, EO. This question asks for the term describing a specific type of motivating operation. The description includes two key effects. It increases the value of a reinforcer and increases the probability of behaviors previously reinforced by that reinforcer. This is the definition of an establishing operation, EO. EOs make you want something more and make you do the behaviors that usually get you that thing. Being hungry is an EO for food, increasing the value of food and making behaviors like looking for a restaurant more likely. It makes the reinforcer more reinforcing and the related behavior more likely. Question 28. A behavior analyst is teaching a child to identify different colors. The analyst holds up a red card and says, "Point to red." The child points to the red card and is reinforced. This is an example of training which type of verbal operant. A. Mand. B. Tact. C. Echoic. D. Listener responding. Answer D. Listener responding. This question tests your knowledge of B. F. Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior. In this scenario, the child is responding to a verbal stimulus, point to red, by performing a non-verbal action, pointing. This demonstrates listener responding, which is following instructions or responding to the verbal behavior of others. A mand is asking for something, a tact is labeling something, and an echoic is repeating something heard. The child is showing they understand and can follow the verbal direction. Question 29. Which ethical principle requires behavior analysts to be truthful and honest? A. Fidelity. B. Integrity. C. Justice. D. Beneficence. Answer B. Integrity. This question asks about a specific ethical principle from the BCBA Ethics Code. The principle of integrity requires behavior analysts to be honest, fair, and truthful in their professional activities. This applies to all aspects of their work, including billing, reporting data, conducting assessments, and communicating with clients and stakeholders. Maintaining integrity builds trust and is fundamental to ethical practice. It means being straightforward and honest in all your professional dealings. Question 30. A client engages in self-injurious behavior, SIB. A functional analysis reveals that SIB is maintained by automatic reinforcement, which intervention strategy might be considered based on this function. A. Providing attention contingent on SIB. B. Blocking SIB and providing a tangible item. C. Enriching the environment with sensory stimulation. D. Implementing an escape extinction procedure. Answer: C. Enriching the environment with sensory stimulation. This question requires you to select an intervention strategy based on the identified function of a behavior. If a behavior is maintained by automatic reinforcement, it means the reinforcement is produced directly by the behavior itself. Example: sensory input, without social mediation. Interventions for automatically reinforced behavior often involve providing alternative ways for the individual to receive similar sensory input or enriching the environment to reduce the motivation for the SIB. Providing attention or tangibles targets social functions, and escape extinction targets the escape function. Giving the client access to various textures or vibrating toys might provide similar sensory input as the SIB. Question 31. What is the primary characteristic of a multiple baseline experimental design? A. Rapid alternation between intervention and baseline conditions. B. Withdrawal and reintroduction of the intervention. C. Staggered implementation of the intervention across different behaviors, settings, or subjects. D. Systematically changing the criterion for reinforcement. Answer: C. Staggered implementation of the intervention across different behaviors, settings, or subjects. This question asks about the defining feature of the multiple baseline design. In a multiple baseline design, data are collected concurrently on two or more baselines. Example: the same behavior in different settings, different behaviors by the same person, or the same behavior across different people. The intervention is then introduced to one baseline, while the others remain in baseline. Once a change is observed, the intervention is introduced to the next baseline, and so on. This staggered implementation demonstrates experimental control, as behavior changes occur only when the intervention is introduced to that specific baseline. It shows the intervention, not some other factor, caused the change by starting it at different times for different baselines. Question 32. A behavior analyst is asked to provide services for a client whose needs are outside their area of competence. According to ethical guidelines, what should the behavior analyst do? A. Provide the services anyway to gain experience. B. Refer the client to a competent professional. C. Provide services under close supervision from someone also incompetent in that area. D. Charge a reduced fee for their inadequate services. Answer: B. Refer the client to a competent professional. This question addresses the ethical obligation to practice only within one's areas of competence. If a behavior analyst lacks the necessary training or experience for a particular case or client population, their ethical responsibility is to decline services and help the client find a qualified professional. Providing services outside one's competence can lead to ineffective or even harmful outcomes for the client. Ethical practice means knowing your limits and ensuring a client receives the best possible care from someone qualified. Question 33. When a stimulus that previously signaled the availability of reinforcement is no longer present and a learned behavior decreases, this is an example of behavior change due to A. Stimulus generalization. B. Discrimination training. C. Spontaneous recovery. D. Response generalization. Answer: B. Discrimination training. This question describes the outcome of discrimination training. Discrimination training involves reinforcing a behavior in the presence of one stimulus, the SD, and withholding reinforcement for that same behavior in the presence of another stimulus, the S delta or S delta. This process teaches the learner to discriminate between the two stimuli and respond appropriately only when this S is present, because that's when reinforcement is available. For example, a child learns to say car when shown a picture of a car. S for reinforcement, but not when shown a picture of a truck. S delta for saying car. They learn to discriminate the cue that predicts reinforcement. Question 34. A behavior analyst wants to measure how long a client engages in on-task behavior during independent work. What is the most appropriate measurement procedure? A. Frequency recording. B. Duration recording. C. Partial interval recording. D. Momentary time sampling. Answer. B. Duration recording. This question asks you to select the best measurement procedure for a specific type of behavior. The phrase "how long a client engages in on-task behavior" indicates that you need to measure the total time the behavior occurs. Duration recording is used when the primary concern is the length of time a behavior lasts from start to end. Frequency counts instances, and interval methods or time sampling don't precisely capture the total time spent engaging in the behavior. If you want to know how long someone spends reading a book, you use a stopwatch to measure the duration. Question 35. What is the primary difference between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement? A. Positive reinforcement increases behavior, while negative reinforcement decreases behavior. B. Positive reinforcement involves adding a stimulus, while negative reinforcement involves removing a stimulus. C. Positive reinforcement is always preferred over negative reinforcement. D. Positive reinforcement is used for skill acquisition, negative reinforcement for behavior reduction. Answer. B. Positive reinforcement involves adding a stimulus, while negative reinforcement involves removing a stimulus. This question asks you to distinguish between the two types of reinforcement. Both positive and negative reinforcement increase the future probability of a behavior. The difference lies in the type of consequence. Positive reinforcement involves presenting or adding a stimulus after the behavior, while negative reinforcement involves removing or taking away an aversive stimulus after the behavior. The positive and negative refer to adding, plus, or removing a stimulus, not whether the stimulus is pleasant or unpleasant. Receiving a paycheck is positive reinforcement. Adding money. Taking pain medication is negative reinforcement. Removing pain. Question 36. Which type of behavior involves responding to one stimulus in the same way as another stimulus, because the two stimuli share similar physical characteristics? A. Stimulus discrimination. B. Stimulus generalization. C. Response generalization. D. Motivating operation. Answer. B. Stimulus generalization. This question describes the phenomenon of stimulus generalization. Stimulus generalization occurs when a behavior that has been reinforced in the presence of a specific stimulus. The training stimulus also occurs in the presence of other similar stimuli without specific training. The more similar the new stimulus is to the original, the more likely the behavior is to occur. For example, if a child is taught to say dog when shown a picture of their pet dog, they might also say dog when seeing pictures of different dogs or even other four-legged animals, demonstrating stimulus generalization. It means the learned behavior spreads to similar situations or stimuli. Question 37. What is the purpose of a preference assessment? A. To determine the function of a behavior. B. To identify potential reinforcers. C. To measure the frequency of a behavior. D. To assess a client's current skill level. Answer. B. To identify potential reinforcers. This question asks about the primary goal of conducting a preference assessment. Preference assessments involve systematically presenting items or activities to a client to determine which ones they choose most often, which can then be tested as potential reinforcers. What a person prefers is likely to be effective as a consequence to increased behavior. While preferences don't guarantee something is a reinforcer, reinforcement is defined by the increase in behavior. They are an essential first step in identifying stimuli that are likely to function as reinforcers for that individual. It's about finding out what might be motivating for the client. Question 38. A behavior analyst determines that a client's challenging behavior is maintained by automatic reinforcement. What does this mean? A. The behavior is reinforced by escape from a task. B. The behavior is reinforced by attention from others. C. The behavior produces its own reinforcement directly, without social mediation. D. The behavior is reinforced by access to tangible items. Answer: C. The behavior produces its own reinforcement directly, without social mediation. This question asks for the definition of automatic reinforcement. When a behavior is automatically reinforced, the sensory consequences produced by the behavior itself are reinforcing, without another person being involved. Examples include humming, hand flapping, or scratching an itch. The feeling, sound, or sensation generated by the behavior is what maintains it. The reinforcement is automatic because it happens naturally as a direct result of the behavior, not because someone else provided it. Question 39. What is the term for a decrease in the frequency of a behavior when a previously reinforced behavior is no longer reinforced? A. Punishment. B. Reinforcement. C. Extinction. D. Spontaneous recovery. Answer: C. Extinction. This question asks about a basic behavioral principle used to decrease behavior. Extinction is the process where a behavior that was previously maintained by reinforcement is no longer followed by that reinforcement, resulting in a decrease in the future frequency of the behavior. It involves withholding the specific consequence that was maintaining the behavior. If a child cries, behavior: to get a cookie, reinforcer, and the parent stops giving cookies when the child cries, extinction. The crying should eventually decrease. Extinction is about stopping the reinforcement for a behavior to make it go away. Question 40. A behavior technician is recording data on a client's vocalizations. They mark whether a vocalization occurred at the very end of each 1-minute interval. What type of measurement is this technician using? A. Whole interval recording. B. Partial interval recording. C. Momentary time sampling. D. Event recording. Answer: C. Momentary time sampling. This question describes another type of discontinuous measurement procedure. The key phrase is mark whether a vocalization occurred at the very end of each interval. This is the definition of momentary time sampling, where the observer looks to see if the behavior is happening only at the precise moment the interval ends. This method is useful for behaviors that are easy to spot and occur frequently, but provides only an estimate of the behavior's occurrence. If you want to know if a student is seated at their desk at the end of every 5-minute check, you're using momentary time sampling. Question 41. According to ethical guidelines, behavior analysts should prioritize the client's needs and interests. This relates most closely to which ethical principle? A. Fidelity. B. Beneficence. C. Justice. D. Respecting autonomy. Answer: B. Beneficence. This question asks about the ethical principle focused on promoting good outcomes. Beneficence means working for the benefit of others, specifically striving to maximize benefits and minimize harm for the client. Prioritizing the client's needs and interests aligns directly with the obligation to act in their best interests and promote their welfare. It's about actively trying to do good for the client and ensure your interventions help them. Question 42. A child is taught to say apple when shown a picture of an apple. Later, without specific training, the child says apple when they see a real apple. This is an example of A. Response generalization. B. Stimulus generalization. C. Stimulus discrimination. D. Echoic behavior. Answer: B. Stimulus generalization. This question describes stimulus generalization in the context of verbal behavior, specifically tacting. The child learned to tact, label one specific type of stimulus, a picture of an apple, and is now tacting a different but similar stimulus, a real apple, without being directly taught to do so. The learned behavior, saying apple, generalized from the picture stimulus to the real apple stimulus because they share physical characteristics. It shows the child's learning is flexible and applies to related stimuli. Question 43. What is the primary purpose of a baseline phase in an ABA graph? A. To implement the intervention. B. To return the behavior to its original level. C. To collect data on the target behavior before the intervention is implemented. D. To reinforce the target behavior continuously. Answer: C. To collect data on the target behavior before the intervention is implemented. This question asks about the function of the baseline phase in research designs used in ABA. The baseline phase is the initial period where data is collected on the target behavior before any intervention is introduced. This provides a measure of the behavior's typical level and variability in the absence of the planned intervention. Baseline data are crucial for comparing the behavior's level during the intervention phase to determine if the intervention caused a change. It's your starting point measure before you do anything new. Question 44. A behavior analyst implements a program where a client earns a break after completing a certain number of math problems. This is an example of which reinforcement schedule? A. Fixed ratio, FR. B. Variable ratio, VR. C. Fixed interval, FI. D. Variable interval, VI. Answer: A. Fixed ratio, FR. This question asks you to identify a specific intermittent reinforcement schedule. The description "earns a break after completing a certain number of math problems" indicates that reinforcement is delivered after a fixed number of responses, ratio. A fixed ratio schedule provides reinforcement after a set number of responses have occurred. For example, FR5 means reinforcement is delivered after every 5 responses. Completing 10 math problems for a break is an FR10 schedule. The fixed means the number of responses required doesn't change. Question 45. What is a potential disadvantage of using punishment? A. It can teach the client new appropriate behaviors. B. It may evoke emotional responding or aggression. C. It requires less effort than reinforcement procedures. D. It increases the future probability of the punished behavior. Answer: B. It may evoke emotional responding or aggression. This question asks about a potential negative side effect of using punishment. While punishment can decrease behavior, ethical guidelines require careful consideration of potential risks. One significant disadvantage is that punishment procedures can sometimes lead to undesirable side effects like increased emotional responses, crying, fear, aggression, or avoidance of the person delivering the punishment. Punishment also doesn't teach a replacement behavior, which is why it's often paired with reinforcement of alternative behaviors. Think about how a child might react negatively if constantly yelled at for making mistakes. Question 46. A parent tells their child, "Clean up your room," and the child puts their toys away. The child is engaging in which type of verbal operant as a listener? A. Mand. B. Tact. C. Intraverbal. D. Listener responding. Answer: D. Listener responding. This question, similar to a previous one, tests your understanding of listener responding. The parent provides a verbal stimulus, "Clean up your room," and the child responds with a nonverbal action, putting toys away. This demonstrates the child's ability to understand and comply with verbal instructions, which is listener responding. The child is acting as a listener who understands the parent's command, and follows it. Question 47. Which type of prompting involves providing a physical touch cue to assist the learner in performing a behavior? A. Gestural prompt. B. Model prompt. C. Physical prompt. D. Verbal prompt. Answer: C. Physical prompt. This question asks you to identify a type of prompt based on its description. A physical prompt involves physically guiding or touching the learner to help them complete a response. This can range from partial physical guidance, light touch, to full physical guidance, hand over hand. Gestural prompts involve pointing, model prompts involve demonstrating the behavior, and verbal prompts involve saying something. Helping a child hold a spoon to feed themselves by gently guiding their hand is a physical prompt. Question 48. According to ethical guidelines, when should behavior analysts terminate services with a client? A. Immediately if the client engages in challenging behavior. B. Only when the client requests termination. C. When the client's goals have been met or services are no longer beneficial. D. When the behavior analyst finds a more preferred client. Answer: C. When the client's goals have been met or services are no longer beneficial. This question focuses on the ethical considerations regarding terminating services. Behavior analysts have an ethical obligation to continue services only as long as they are beneficial to the client. Services should be terminated when the client has achieved their goals, when the behavior analyst is no longer able to help them, or when the client no longer wishes to receive services. Terminating because the client is challenging or because a better client is available is unethical. Transitioning services smoothly and ensuring continuity of care are also ethical considerations during termination. Question 49. What is the primary purpose of conducting a task analysis? A. To identify the function of a challenging behavior. B. To break down a complex skill into smaller teachable steps. C. To assess a client's preferences. D. To determine the frequency of a behavior. Answer: B. To break down a complex skill into smaller teachable steps. This question asks about the purpose of a task analysis. A task analysis is a process of breaking down a complex skill or behavior chain, like washing hands or tying shoes, into a sequence of smaller, more manageable steps. This is done to make the skill easier to teach, learn, and measure. Once the steps are identified, they can be taught using chaining procedures. If you want to teach someone to make a sandwich, you first do a task analysis to list every single step involved, from getting the bread out to putting the sandwich together. Question 50. Which type of functional assessment involves administering questionnaires, conducting interviews, and reviewing records to gather information about a behavior? A. Functional analysis. B. Indirect assessment. C. Descriptive assessment. D. Direct observation. Answer: B. Indirect assessment. This question asks about a specific category of functional assessment methods. Indirect assessment involves gathering information about a client's behavior through means other than directly observing the behavior itself. This typically includes interviews with the client, family, or caregivers, completing questionnaires or checklists, and reviewing existing records, example medical history, school reports. While useful for generating initial hypotheses about behavior function, indirect assessments are considered less reliable than direct observation methods. It's gathering information about the behavior from others rather than seeing it yourself